This is the introductory lesson. When we get to the variant vowels or consonants, this is the word sorting procedure that you'll use to introduce the concept that in English, many times one sound can be spelled in multiple ways. So you'll see the lesson up the top, sound introduction for O. So this is the O sound. We've got some basic directions up at the top, but there are more specific directions in the workbook that you can follow. So you'll see that there's a word bank up here, and then you'll see that the spellings are in bold and underlined, and then there are lines for you to have the child sort and write the word. So let's go through what this would look like. We'll begin by just telling the child that today we're going to be learning about ways to spell the sound O. And there are some pretty common ways to do that. So all of these words will have the O vowel sound. And that makes it easier for the student because then they know the vowel sound is O. They don't have to guess. They're just told. So it actually makes it much easier for them to read the words. Now, you can start by previewing all of these different ways to spell the O, and you can show it to them. Now, when you get down to this one, I refer to this as a split vowel. So instead of the vowels being together, like they are here, the vowels are split, and there's going to be a single consonant in between. So we can just refer to this as a split vowel. I'll show you a little bit of a tip as we're reading when the child is reading how you can connect this to make it look a little bit easier and help the student connect those vowels. So I'll go over that in a minute. But you're basically going to go through these simple steps for each word. You're going to, number one, ask the child to underline the vowel spelling in the word. And again, they've previewed, these are the different ways we can spell it. We can spell it with a single O. We can also spell it with the two-letter spellings, O-A, O-W, or O-E, or we have a split vowel. So the child will look at the first word. We can see that there's an O-E, so they can underline it. So we're going to say, go ahead and read the word. Goes. Okay? Now find that matching pattern. They can see it's down here. Now we're going to say goes, say each sound as you write. So here's what this would look like. Move this up a little bit. The child will do G, O, Z, and read it back. Goes. Okay? Now, the next word, we can see the vowels are split. So when the kids are doing split vowels, I have them underline it and then just connect it with like a little arc. And then read the word. Note. Say and write note. N-O-T. Read it back. Note. Okay, now again, all of the directions are up here. Find our spelling, blend the word. Boat. Find the matching spelling, say and write. B-O-T. Read it back. Boat. Now, after the child has read and sorted all of the words, then you want them to go ahead and read back. So let's say, I'm just going to jump ahead to show you what this would look like. And this one only has two O's. So the child would read old, told. We can see that that O came at the beginning or in the middle. And then the next one, let's see, we had boat, we had road, and we had coast, and the child would read it down. Boat, road, coast. And we can see those are coming in the middle. OA occasionally comes at the beginning, but usually it's a middle spelling. And then we want to make sure that the student is really paying attention to that OW that comes at the end. And this is the one that's the most consistent. If we hear O at the end, it is usually OW, occasionally OE, but usually OW. Grow, show, blow. And you just continue in this way after everything's sorted to just reread those words down the column and talk about any patterns that the child notices, like that the OW comes at the end of the word and we see the OA in the middle, for instance. Another thing that's new at this level in Workbook 2 is after the students do their sound sorting, they're going to read multisyllabic words. Now, for the most part, the words are broken up based on how we speak them and how we say them. In English, we tend to start each syllable with a consonant sound as opposed to a vowel sound. So you'll see that the words are pre-syllabicated, meaning that they're already broken up into different chunks. Okay, so the student is going to read the first chunk, read the second chunk, put it together. So it would look like this. Snowman, snowman. Window, window. Yellow, yellow. Rowboat, rowboat. Now, in some cases, you'll see in some of the lists, even though I tend to break the words up based on how we say the words, which is in English, we start with that consonant sound like rowboat or window. You'll notice with yellow, I did break it up a little differently, and that's because many kids are going to recognize this chunk that they know, yell, yell, oh. Now, if you broke up a word in this way, yellow, yellow, that would have been perfectly fine as well. There's more than one way you can syllabicate a word. I just try to think about which way I think will be most helpful for that particular word, and then I try to do it that way. I want to also point out words like going have two morphemes. They have a base word like go, and they also have a suffix, ing. And so in a word like going, you'll notice there happens to be two vowels next to each other, and that does occasionally happen. So a word like going, I may break up go, ing, keeping those morphemes together. Go, ing, going. Okay, so that's another example. Or a word like, say, toaster. So toaster, this is how we spell toaster. Now toaster, we could break it up as toast-ter. That's how we say it, toaster. Or we could keep the morphemes together. Toast, because toast is a base word. And then we have a suffix er. So we could break it up that way as well. Toast-er, toaster. So there's more than one way to syllabicate a word. But I just wanted to point out that there will be multisyllabic words that will eventually become three-syllable words as well. And the way we go about reading them is we read the first chunk, we read the second chunk, we read it together to blend the chunks together. And then also to be aware that we can break words apart based on keeping the morphemes together, like as in going or toaster. We also can break words up based on just how we say them, like yellow or rowboat. Or even the word toaster, we could break it up as toaster. You can get to the word the same way. So we don't have elaborate rules in this. We don't have things that kids have to memorize. It's really focusing on how we speak the words, how they come out of our mouth, and then also keeping in mind those meaningful units that can be helpful as well when we're trying to decode words. If the child is still having difficulty with sounding out words and the phonemic awareness seems like it still needs some work, then we do have some additional phonemic awareness tasks that can be done. They are in the appendix. So these pages, all of the pages in the appendix can be photocopied. So it says it in the workbook, but you could print these out until you have them, and you'll see that they go with the vowel lessons. So like the O is going to go, these tasks are going to go with the O lesson. It just gives the children just a little bit of extra practice to kind of build that muscle a little bit, that phonemic awareness muscle, by doing some sound manipulations. So what the child will need is the sound box template, and then this is going to be again in the appendix. It can be photocopied. And then some sort of manipulative. So I have some little circles here, but you could use pennies, you could use Lego pieces, really anything that can be manipulated. And so you'll ask the child, so here's the first one I'm going to show you here. So this is what I'm reading for the O lesson. Say boat without t, and they get bow. Now you're not showing this to the child. This is for you to say. So you would say to the student, show me the sounds in boat, and they're going to move one chip for each sound. B, O, t, boat. Now, what if we have boat without t? What's left? B-o, bow. Okay. Here's another example. Show me the sounds in flown. Say flown. F-l-o-n. Flown. What if we say flown without f? What's left? L-o-n. Loan. Okay. Here's another example. Show me the sounds in slow. S-l-o. Slow. Say slow without s, and we get low. So those are some examples where we're deleting. Some of them we ask for a change. So here's an example from a different lesson. Show me the sounds in good. G, d, good. Change g to k. And what's our new word? K, d, could. Now, the benefit of doing these kinds of activities is it not only is helping the student work on phoneme manipulation, which is important, it's kind of stretching their working memory a bit because they do have to hold the sounds in their working memory. So that working memory holds on to information for just a few seconds. And many kids that have reading issues also struggle with have a poor working memory. And so it does help them to improve and gives them a chance to hold on to those sounds. A lot of students who really, really struggle with reading have difficulty holding sounds in their head and giving them back. And they're going to struggle at first, but what you can do with them is you can model it for them and have them practice it. So even at the very beginning, a lot of kids have trouble even segmenting a word into sounds. So a word like mop, mop, mop. A child might have difficulty doing that. If you say to them, what are the sounds in mop? They might go mop. They can't even do that. So what you can do is you can model mop, mop. Now you try mop, mop. So you can do some modeling as well. Most of the phonemic awareness is built into the lessons at the younger stages with letters. And we also do the sound swap game, which also helps with phonemic awareness. But really at any stage, you can use little tokens for extra practice to help students with segmenting sounds. You can also take those sound swap activities and do them with chips, which is a much harder task for a child that you think maybe needs some extra practice with that. So again, if the student's struggling with phonemic awareness, you want to do that phonemic awareness task with them, but not all kids will need it. Some kids are going to be reading very automatically, not having difficulty sounding out, and they just need to keep moving along and learning those letter sound correspondences. So if they don't need the phonemic awareness tasks, you don't have to do them. But if you're seeing that the student is having trouble segmenting, having trouble reading with automaticity and those words sticking, then you are going to want to incorporate those phonemic awareness tasks as part of the lesson. You'll see at least one or more phoneme grapheme mapping activities that help practice specific sound spellings related to the new sound. So here's an example of the O sound and how we spell it at the end of a word. So in this one, we're focusing on how we usually spell the O as OW at the end of a word, but in some short words, we also can spell it with the letter O. So you'll see the box up here gives you a little bit of a kind of a teaching point to explain when and how we use this spelling. And this is really nothing new. If the students have been already worked through workbook 1, they've done this. So you're going to blend the word and then say and dot, say and write. And the first one is done for you. So I'm going to show you an example of what this would look like for the second one. So I blend the word, show, say and dot, sh, o, say and write, sh, o. And it's important to always do one sound spelling in each sound box. So we're not ever going to divide up an sh because it's one sound, or we wouldn't divide up the ow because it's one sound. Okay, I'll do one other example. Grow is the word. Like my plant will grow, I say and dot, g, r, o, I say and write, g, r, o. Right, and then after the students have mapped all the words, it's a great idea to just have them read through it again. You could have them read down the list, up the list if you need to build that automaticity. And then I also want to point out a couple things. One is that there's a multisyllabic word. So a lot of these lists do have multisyllabic words, and the word will be syllabicated for you to make it easier for the child to read. So they would read it going. But then they're going to map it as they would any other word. So if I read going, I say in da, g, o, I, ng. Say in right. G, o, I, ng. And remember, it's by the sound. So some of you might say, well, wait a minute, ing is a suffix, ing. That is absolutely right. This is a meaningful chunk, but ing has two sounds because remember, we're trying to map the sound with the spelling. So you could point out to the student afterward, hey, look, we do have a suffix here, and talk about the meaning if you wanted to. I know some teachers will have the kids go back and box the suffixes as just a quick review. That's something you can do if you want to do, but not necessary. Just want to point out that it is always going to be by sound, even if it is a suffix. Then the student will go ahead and read the words that have the target spelling. So here it says the target sound, so it could be any sound that has an O. Now, kids have to be careful because a word like not, even though there is the letter O in not, it's not making the O sound, it's the ah sound. So the student should read the sentence in their head first and then highlight all of the O sounds because the sound is O. So they're gonna highlight any O sound. So if it snows, Joe will not go on the road. Okay, so even though the child in this list was focusing on the OW and the O, we're constantly reviewing because remember I talk about that cumulative review. We keep coming back and reviewing. So even though, yes, they're focusing on the OW and O, they can review the other O sounds as they're reading because those are going to be included in the sentences. We're not just going to have the spellings that are here. So after they've highlighted, then they can read aloud, and then you're going to give them any corrective feedback if they make a mistake. If it snows, Joe will not go on the road. Okay, and then you're just going to do that for those three sentences. So they highlight the sound, the target sound, and then they're going to read it out loud. And then the words to ponder at the bottom is something to discuss related to, usually it's homophones, but in this case, it's about meaning. If we look at the words go, going, goes, and gone, how are they all related? How are these words related? Well, they're all related in meaning. I go to the store, she is going to the store, she goes to the store, she is gone. So it can help kids with spelling, especially the word gone. They're hearing the ah sound, and they might get confused. But if you show them, it actually has the word go is in all of these words because they're all related in meaning. It can help them. Okay, so that's something to talk about. The words to ponder is really just a conversation that you have with the child. I also want to talk about the word goes because some people might say, well, how am I going to map that word? There isn't really a right or wrong way. You could do the G, the O, and then the ES in one box. But for me, it mapping wise, I think makes more sense to me and to the child. Even though go is the base word and we're adding an ES suffix, when it comes to the sounds, doing it as G, O, and then Z, to me, makes a little bit more sense. Just because the ES suffix is usually the is, and that's not is, it's just Z. So I would map it this way, G, O, Z. If you're ever unsure, just listen to how the word is coming out of your mouth, and then as the adult, attach what you're saying to what you're seeing, and that will help you. What we're trying to teach here is something called code overlap. In other words, there are certain spellings here, in this case EA, certain spellings that can be more than one sound. So in this case, EA, it can be E, it can be A, it can be A. Now the EA as the E has been taught in an earlier lesson. So in this, we're looking at the EA, the two less common spellings of the E as in bread or the A as in bear. And the students are comparing those two to practice. So what we want students to understand by teaching this is that if they come across a word they've never seen before and they're reading it as one sound, and if it's not making a word, then you want them to try the other sound. Okay, so sometimes it can actually be both. Here's an example. For instance, the word bread. If I read this as breed, well, breed is also a word. So breed is spelled with E-E, but that's something you would need to tell the child. So occasionally you will get words like this where breed and bread can be either. But others, like this is another example. This is great, or it could also be greet. But it can't be gret, because gret wouldn't make a word. So if a child read this as gret, you would say, well, that's not a word. What else could this be? And they would go through the other sounds. And if they said greet, you could say, yeah, actually it could be Greek, but greet is spelled, and you'd show them G-R-E-E-E-T, and you would just show them that's greet. So this can't be greet. What could it be then? It could be great. So it just gives them an opportunity to practice what we call vowel flexibility, knowing that a spelling can represent more than one sound, and sometimes we have to switch those sounds, swap those sounds in and out in order to make a word we know. And then, of course, once we're reading a word in the context of a story, then that context is also going to help us figure out which of the sounds we want to use. So you could go ahead and teach this. It tells you up here. The EA can also spell E, and it can spell A. So we have the word bread. We have the word bear. So all of these words, it could be E or it could be A. So, read a word. If you know it, great. If you don't know it, then try one and see if it makes a word. And if not, you're going to have to switch out the sound. So then the student, again, is going to do what they do for all the phoneme grapheme mapping activities. You're going to read it. Bread, say and dot, b, r, e, d, say and write. B, r, e, d, bread. So they're going to go through that, and you're going to see when they get down here, we're going to have some multisyllabic words, so they're going to read each chunk and blend. Now, if they read this as A, hay-vy, hay-vy. Is that a word? Hay-vy? No. Try the E. Heavy. Heavy. Is that a word? Yeah, heavy. The rocks were heavy. Okay, and then they would say in dot, E, v, E, say and write. E, v, E. Read it back. Heavy. Okay, so that's how we go about doing that. And then the same thing here, we're going to highlight words with the target pattern. So in this case, we're going to look for all of those EA words. The student reads it silently while finding those. And then the child will read it out loud. We had great weather and enjoyed the day. And then at the bottom, we have words to ponder, weather, and weather. And so we're going to use those in context, teach the child what those different words means, maybe have them sketch some pictures. Like for weather, I might have them do some clouds with some raindrops and maybe some thunderbolts or some snowflakes, just to kind of help them see that that's what that weather would be. It just helps them visualize it and remember. Just like at the earlier levels, before the student reads the story, you want to do a quick get ready to read activity. And again, you'll need to preview the story and decide, are there any words I think might be challenging for the child? So we want to really focus on high frequency words with irregular spellings that may be challenging. Vocabulary words we can preview if we need to, but for the most part, vocabulary is really best taught within the context of the story. So if the child gets to a word like, say, sob, she started to sob, you want to talk about the word sob within the context of what's happening. So the girl started to cry. So sob means to cry. So vocabulary is often best discussed within the context of the story, but if you happen to be reading a story where the word is critical to the story and it's all throughout it and you think the child doesn't know what it means, that would be a good word to preview. But for the most part, you're really focusing on those high frequency words. And for your reference, there are a list of common high frequency words in the appendix. So some ideas from here. What might be some challenging things in this story? So the word water might be challenging. The word watch could be challenging because of the A sound as the ah. Same with wanted. Those are great high frequency words. The word looked might be a good one because it is high frequency, and at this point in the sequence, the child has not explicitly learned that OO. But looked is such a high frequency word that the child may have seen it before. So it also depends on the student you're working with, and you know best what they know, what they don't know. But either way, you're going to, regardless of what you choose, you're going to introduce it in the same way. So I'm just going to pick the word looked and assume that maybe that's a good one for the student I'm working with. And then I want to preview the word. Again, we can use the printable sound mat that you have. This is a little mat that I have that I use as part of my Sound Start Literacy program. I have a K3 program that uses Google Slides that's for classroom teachers. So these are the mats that the teachers use. So I do use these and I use them in my practice. But you also have your sound boxes mat that you can print out and put in your sheet protector, and you could use that to introduce the new word as well. So it's really up to you how you'd like to do it. I'm going to use this sound boxes mat because in the earlier video I used my writing mat. So now I'm going to show you how you could do this with the sound boxes if you prefer. So I'm going to introduce the word looked. So I would say to the student, we're going to have a word that might be a little tricky that you've maybe never seen before, and it will be in the story. So let's take a look at the word together. Here's the word we're going to be learning, and this is the word looked, as in I looked out my window and saw a bird making a nest, or I looked into the sky and saw some stars. So I want to give the word in context, and then I'm going to ask the child, what are the sounds that you hear in looked? And the student will just put the sounds. They can put the sounds on their fingers if they want. Looked. There's 4 sounds. Now what you can do if you're choosing to use the sound boxes for this, you can circle the sounds as the child says it. So it would look like this. L, k, t. So we've got 4 sounds. Okay? And then the child is going to say and write the word looked. L, k, t. Looked. Now, if the student isn't sure, do we separate the E with the D? You can remind them, and at this point they will have learned that the ED suffix is 1 unit and it is the T sound in this word. So they probably won't have a problem with that. But again, if you didn't do level 1, if you didn't do the first workbook, you're going to be weaving in a lot of this with these suffixes, with the ED and the ING and such. So you might have to point that out to the student. And then you're going to ask them to say and write looked one more time. L, k, t, and read it back. Looked. Okay, so that's how we can just quickly introduce the words that we see that might be challenging for the child in the story, and you can use your sound boxes mat and just a dry erase marker to do this pretty quickly. The last step is going to be reading connected text. So the student will be reading a story. Now we have this at all levels. Once the students even get into those CVC words toward the ends of those CVC words with the single letter spellings, you'll see more connected text with stories. This is an example from the O sound. So this would be a higher level story. But regardless of the story, you're really going to go through the same steps. They're all outlined in the workbook in the directions for the instructor. So I'm not going to go through all of that. But what I do want to talk about a little bit is story grammar. So this is our story grammar chart, and this is what we use to help check for understanding as the student is reading, or as you're reading to the child. If you have a student with very poor fluency who really needs a model, you might then use the story grammar as part of your introductory reading to stop and check for understanding. But it also teaches the child the structure of narrative storytelling. So you want to teach them about setting. That setting can show us the time, it can show us the place, the characters in the story, there's always some sort of initiating event. It's usually some sort of a problem. It might be some sort of a wish of some kind. But there is some event that kind of kicks off the story and initiates the rest of the story to follow. Now, keeping in mind that the stories included in Sound Start Literacy are very basic and they're short. Children should be reading much more than what is provided in Sound Start Literacy. So in addition to our stories, we definitely want kids reading things they're interested in, going to the library, reading chapter books, picture books, whatever they want to read, and the parent or the teacher is helping to support them and helping them get through those books and providing maybe the sounds or the words that the child cannot read yet, but we want to make sure that they're doing a whole host of reading. Now the student will be working on using the new sound spellings that were learned in the lesson along with previously taught sound spellings to spell words. The first thing you'll want to do is make sure you have the dictation. So the dictation directions are in the workbook along with the list of the target spellings that will be used in the lesson and the words for dictation. Now you can print this out because anything in the appendix can be photocopied, or you can just take a quick picture of it with your phone and then you have a picture of the words for dictation. Now you'll want to begin by putting the target spellings up in the dictation in the sound spelling boxes where it says target spellings. Now the thing that will be a little bit different about this level is that the students will be spelling one sound with different spellings. And so for this, instead of dictating the sounds like you could do in the earlier levels, because it was one sound, one spelling, that is going to be more difficult because now you have various spellings. So these target spellings will be written up at the top to give the student a clue about which spelling they're going to use. Because certain spellings, for instance, like the EE in feet and the EA in each, you really don't know what the spelling will be. So that's why the target spellings can be used, and we want to encourage the child to look back at those target spellings when the student is thinking about what type of, which spelling to use for which word. So you'll want to begin. You can have the child copy the spellings, or you can write the spellings, either way. And then what you'll want to do is go through and just review the sounds and tell them these are some of the spellings that will be used in this list that I'm going to be dictating. And so make sure you're looking up here and using it as a resource. And then you could just go through and have the child read the different sound spellings. Or, th and th, sh, r, and ch. Okay? Then you have your list. So I'm going to do for this example, this was actually with lesson 26. So I would find the corresponding lesson that I just taught, and then my target spellings, and then these would be the words that I'm dictating. And I want to point out suffixes are in bold. And that's just for your knowledge, because when you go to dictate a suffix, the procedure's a little bit different. Again, the procedures are in the workbook, so if you forget what I'm telling you, you can go back, look at the directions, and it's in there for you. So I'm just going to do a couple of examples. So the first word I'm going to dictate is the word north. The procedure for a single syllable word is the same. The student says the word, student segments the sounds, writes the word. So again, the easiest way to do it, to segment, is just n or th, have the child finger spell it, or you can use some sort of tokens, it's up to you, and then have the child say and write north. N or th, north. Now you might wonder, well, how does the child know if it's O-R or O-R-E? Well, by the time they get to this dictation, you'll have already taught them that the O-R-E spelling is when you hear or at the end of the word, with the exception of the word for. So if the child spelled it with an E, you could say, oh, wait a minute, let's think about this. Which of these spellings do we use in the middle? And then the child can look at that and say, oh, yeah, that's right. We're going to use this one. So this is to help them. Now, if you want to, what you could do is stick a little dash there to remind the child that this one comes at the end. could do the same thing with the TCH. This is the spelling that comes at the end. That's just a little bit of a support if the child needs it. Okay, and then they're going to read it back, north. Now I want to do an example of one that has a suffix. Okay, so one of the words on this list is the word arms. I use my 2 arms to do work, arms. Now the word arms has a base word, which is arm, and a suffix, which is the S. The reason we want to always ask students, what's the base word and then what's the suffix, is because when kids go to write the whole word at once, oftentimes what happens is they drop one of the sounds. They might not hear all of the sounds correctly. Or they might spell a word like jumped with a T at the end instead of an ED if you don't remind them that there's actually a suffix at the end. So whenever you're dictating a word that has a suffix, and again, it will be indicated with the bold. You can see all the suffixes, and these will be things that kids have been taught previously before you ask them to write them. You always want to prompt the child with, what's the base word? Good job, say and write the base word, now add the suffix. So I'll show you what this would look like. So I'm dictating the word arms. I use my arms to do work. What's the base word in arms? Now you have to explain what the base word is. The base word is the word without the suffix. So what do we hear in arms? If I only had one of them, I'd say my arm. So now how do we spell arm? We're going to finger spell the base word, arm. And we're going to do arm, good. And now how do we add the suffix? What suffix means more than one? And we're going to add that in and read it in, arms. Okay, I'll do one other example. So the word, let's do the word fetched. My dog fetched the stick. What's the base word in fetched? Fetched. Fetch. Okay, so let's finger spell fetch. Fetch. Now let's say and write fetch. Ch. Now, how do we turn fetch into fetched? What's the suffix we're going to need to add? Now, this is something that will have been taught at lower levels. If for some reason you're just working with workbook 2 and you didn't do the first workbook, your child might write a T here because they might not know ED. So in that case, what you would want to do is you would want to include that ED suffix and explain to them that that's what we would add to the word to make it fetched. So this is assuming that the child did the first workbook and knows about the ED suffix and the ING suffix. All of these, we call them inflectional suffixes. They're the most common suffixes. They were all taught in workbook 1. Okay, so again, if you have questions about the procedure for this, you can always go back to the workbook directions and it tells you. The last thing I want to talk about, so we just talked about some suffixes. I want to talk about words that have more than one syllable. Now, a syllable is a word or a chunk of a word with a vowel sound. And so when a child goes to write a word that has more than one syllable, it can be difficult because they have to hear all of the sounds. It's a longer word with more sounds. So to make it easier, we ask the child to break it up into syllables or chunks. And each chunk will need a vowel sound. If the child has difficulty hearing syllables in words, you can prompt the child to put their hand underneath their chin, and when they say the word, they will feel the chin drop. So if I'm doing the word popcorn, let's pretend we're dictating the word popcorn. If I put my hand under my chin and say the word popcorn slowly, popcorn, my chin will drop twice, and that tells me it's a 2-syllable word. So when I'm dictating a multisyllabic word, I want the child to break up the word into syllables. So if I want them to write popcorn, I'll ask them how many syllables or chunks, and you can use the word syllable, you can use the word chunk, depends on what you're comfortable with and what you think is best for the child you're working with. How many syllables or chunks in the word popcorn? And the child says it slowly, popcorn. Great, there are 2 syllables in popcorn. So we're going to say and write the first syllable. What's in the first chunk? Pop. Good, say and write pop. Good, what's the second chunk? In popcorn, and have them keep saying the word popcorn. corn. We have pop, we need corn. Good, say and write corn. Corn. Now, if you think the child needs to finger spell each piece, like maybe you want them to finger spell corn, you can do that. That's a scaffold. Sometimes it's that support. They need to hear it segmented before they write the word. So you kind of have to think about the child in front of you, but you always want them to break it up. You don't want to say, write popcorn, and then have them write the whole thing. Break it up by syllable. Pop, corn. Good. Say and write pop, up. Say and write corn, corn. Read back the word, popcorn. Now, one thing you could do if you feel the child needs a little bit more support, if that's hard for them, you can write a line for each syllable. So I'll give you another example. Another 2-syllable word, and it also happens to be a compound word, is the word barnyard. So if I said to the student, okay, we're going to spell the word barnyard. The cows are in the barnyard. What are the syllables in barnyard? Barnyard. Good. How many syllables? 2. Barnyard. So you could go ahead and draw in lines if you feel that is helpful and the child needs that. What's the first chunk? So again, if the child needs additional support, barn, we could have them finger spell barn, barn, say and write barn, barn, say and write, we've got the second chunk, we have barn, yard, say and write yard, yard, and we have the whole word, let's read it back, barnyard. Okay, so every child's going to be a little different in terms of the support they need. So just to recap, if you're doing a single syllable word, you just finger spell it, say it and write it, just like we were doing in earlier levels. If the word has a suffix, we're going to first write the base word, arm, and then we're going to ask the child to add that suffix, the suffix s, to make it mean more than one. Same with fetched. We're going to do our base word first, fetch, and then we add our suffix, ed, to make it fetched. If we're doing a 2-syllable word, we break up the word by syllables first, and then we say and write each syllable. If the child needs more support, you can draw in one line for each word, and then have the child go in and write it. So we have some different options for that. Then we want to do a sentence dictation, and that's really up to you in terms of the sentences that you want to use to dictate. It's going to be the same as it was at the earlier levels. You're going to just choose something from the lesson. So it might be a story, a sentence from the story. It might be a sentence from the phoneme grapheme mapping sheet. It's completely up to you. And it's up to you how many sentences. You want to do at least one sentence and then check with cups. You could do 2 up to 3 sentences. It really depends on the child. And this is a great activity. Sentence dictation is something you can do as many times as you want to. If you wanted to repeat sentence dictation over the course of the week, you can do that as well, and just do kind of one sentence at a time.